So I would start my conversation with modernity, like as we understand it. Every time someone mentions the term modernity, we always think of the scientific revolution and the ideas of scientific reason kind of pushing back, pushing the boundaries of theological ways of looking at the world. But to me, the biggest marker of modernity uh, was women's entrance into the public sphere. Okay, now let me qualify that statement. So, the public sphere, technically speaking, is the sphere of power and politics, right? Uh, which traditionally has had been the domain of men, right? Even if you pick up all the sacred texts, the Greek texts, the Christians, the Judaic, the Hindu texts, the Muslim texts. There are vocabularies that we use in Hindi, in Urdu, in Farsi, Arabic, Japanese for women, which are always associated with home. So the Greeks, when they defined full humanity, to be fully human, you had to be a public person. You had to be someone who has a public life and lives up to public obligations. And that's why men only were allowed in the public sphere and had a vote and all that. So modernity for me is when women, if you look at the first wave feminism, the suffragettes and others in Europe, United States, the fight for them was to enter the public sphere, to get an education, get jobs, and have access to the public sphere. And it's crucial to keep that in mind because all conservative movements, and I'm making a huge generalization here, all conservative movements are inscribed on the bodies of women because all conservative movements want to undo that bursting opening of the public sphere and want to reinscribe women back into the household, back into a domesticated role. That's why it's crucial for those of you who are studying literature and languages to keep in mind that it's not just about just that women can write and hence they have come to power, or since the inequalities are structural in a sense that there are sacred texts that underwrite them, there are patriarchal laws that underwrite them, and then there are patriarchal attitudes that underwrite them. So simple entry into a market or in a job market is not enough, right? The world will change only when the distinctions are no longer there, whether you're a man or a woman or a transgender person. So there is something else at stake here. If you look at any political system, think of like humanity, right? How do we constitute it? How do we think of it? And if you think through, let's say Giorgio Agamben, right, the Italian philosopher, and he's reading, of course, Aristotle and Plato, and he further theorizes these two Greek concepts, right? Zoe and bios, right? So Zoe is all life, everything living and breathing, which is translated into English as bare life. Everything qualifies as bare life. And bios is qualified life. It's the life that is valued, that has power, that has rights. So in any given society where gender is operative, what happens is that bios part of the life is one who, and this is through Roberto Esposito's work, those who are qualified as qualified life as bios are the ones who are active right holders. They own the public sphere. They own the mode of production. They are the ones who have power. And then there are so many others who are passive right holders. They are allowed to live and allowed to subsist, but their place in any given economic and political system is that of passive right holders. They have rights, but they cannot actively do anything in that world. So the conservative onslaught on any kind of gender equality is always reducing women to the level of passive right holders, right? By depoliticizing them, but reinscribing them in home. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if you look at the rise of Islamism and Islamic fundamentalism in South Asia, especially in Pakistan. So what do these people argue? The argument is that the human existence is divided into two spheres, right? The home sphere and the sphere of the outside world. And it's the home sphere that dictates what kind of children we raise and what kind of a world we create. So women are important, but they should stay at home and raise children, right? That's their natural responsibility. And capital, where it is now, neoliberal capital, right? It plays with those tropes. So I don't know if it happens in your region or not. In most areas of Pakistan, if a global corporation wants to send out piece work or, patchwork that people do, they make shirts and everything else, they would tell their male relatives that, your women don't even have to leave the house. We will bring the work to them and they can make these garments at home. And then you just pack them and send them to us and we'll send you the payment. Very convenient because they can use the cheap female labor. But what's the problem with that? The problem with that is that women, even when they're working full time, do not have access to the liberatory potential of capital, which was that they went to work. So when you go to work, you meet other women, you talk to them about injustices at work, you become political, you become part of the labor movement, you become a constituency, right? So in my reading of any kind of patriarchal norm, its existence as it is depends on philosophically and politically reinscribing women into the private sphere. And you will see it in women's movement as well, right? Women are basically saying, oh, we want to be good mothers and we want to be good sisters. Fine. But then there is a trope that develops. If you all must have read Partha Chatterjee, remember, Nation and Its Fragments. There's a moment where he talks about the Bengali drama. And during the 1930s and 40s, the way the drama is being written, the play is being written, there is always a proper Indian woman character, and she's the one who is middle class, honorable, she is polite and proper, and she takes care, kind of like Mother India, right? She takes care of her family and everything else. And then juxtaposed against her is a caricature, and that's a westernized woman, right? An educated woman, and she's often represented as a comical character, right? That trope still is mobilized by people. It's still used. So what can we do as literature professors? Is to invite our students to think about these things. When they read a novel, don't just read what's in it or what characters are there or what is the setting, but to ask of a book or of a professor, okay, you are teaching us this book. what is it normalizing? Okay, you selected 4 novels for this class on Tamil literature. Um, After we have read them, all of them privilege this. Is this what you want us to internalize? So we teach our students to look at a text and not just ask what's in it, what kind of language is used, or even what is the plot, but rather what kind of a worldview does it normalize? And in terms of gender, what kind of a gender hierarchy does it normalize that it doesn't even explain, which is taken for granted? Because the consequences of reading these texts uncritically and not questioning their assumptions and what they normalize is that then we internalize it, right? And if we are valorizing that text, then we aspire to become those kind of people, or we feel like, oh, we are not living up to this standard. I mean, think of in your sacred texts, right? If you're religious, think of all the female characters, right? The one defining element is sacrifice, is suffering, is living for the others, right? There's only, one warrior goddess, and everyone is afraid of her, and her name is Kali, right? Uh, Everyone else, is that is what we internalize, right? Even the story of Sati, the way, the body parts fall, right? Uh, so the question then is what do we teach our students, right? Do we teach them to just go and destroy the patriarchy? I mean, that's not how it is done. You build solidarities, right? You retrieve from your own culture what is liberatory and what enables you to develop, a strident critique of injustices, gender injustices, class and caste injustices. And then you build solidarities with others across gender, across race, across class and caste. And then maybe someday, probably not in my lifetime, but in our children's lifetime, we will have a world where it won't matter what your gender is or what your class is, where we would look at each other, right, and just acknowledge each other's full humanity. How do we build solidarity in the male dominated society to bring equality? Some more thoughts. It's a really good question, because the thing is, obviously, we can't go to strangers and say, hey, come and join our cause. We always build solidarities inward out. So we first go to people we know and trust, right? And talk to them about it and see if they are sympathetic to what we are trying to accomplish. Or will they be in sympathy with us if, let's say, Masood Raja works at a college campus and he sees that women are treated badly, right? So he will first go to some of those women and say, okay, I'm a man, but I'm a feminist. What do we need to do to come together? So 2 people, 3 people come together, talk about it. Then with those 3 people, they reach out to people that they know. So we build solidarities first in the group that we are in, and then let the group expand slowly, right? The only ticket to entry is that anyone who comes in needs to be in solidarity with your cause, but not necessarily that they ought to be women, they ought to be Christians or Hindus and Muslims. No, that they are in sympathy with your cause. And then slowly from there, we build it out. I'm very radical in my political thought, but in my activism, I believe in soft activism. I believe that love can accomplish more than shouting at people. right? And that's my philosophy. That's the life I've lived. That's the kind of teaching I do. So the idea is to build it with people you trust first and then expand from there, right? And but remember, this work, the work of justice, social justice, is constant. There is no moment where we stop and say we have arrived, because the problem is the reactionary forces are too powerful, and they constantly keep trying to incorporate us in the system and then re-articulate it with a new kind of regime, right? Which Gramsci would call it a regime. So the work is constant, but to make it sustainable, we have to find friends, we have to find people, and we have to have place for love in our life, like love and kindness. And that will sustain you. You can take on some, in my short life, I have taken on some very powerful constituencies and might have lost a little here and there, but they have not been able to crush my spirit. And the reason is people, people who pick you up and who prop you up and who tell you they still love you. So keep that in mind. Could you please comment on, there is celebration of woman and womanhood um, in every religion, and we do have evidences. What does it reflect? In parallel, suppression is what we have been witnessing in most cases, which we read in every literature. That's a really good point. There is a certain valorization of women in all major religions, right? In Hinduism, in Islam, Judaism, right? And there is no denying that. But remember, very few religions accord women an autonomous identity. Women, if they are mothers, and when we are Muslims, we will touch our mother's feet, right? And we will kiss them, right? No other, we will never even imagine touching another human being's feet, but for our mothers, we will do that. Women, when they are daughters, we love them. When they are sisters, we owe them so much. So the problem in all those articulation is that women's value is connected to a male order, and how does she perform identity within that. And there is nothing wrong with that. The wrong is what feminism is about is not that men are terrible and women are good. No. What it's about is it's saying that women should autonomously as individuals have the same value as men have in the society. They shouldn't have to be good mothers, good daughters, or good sisters. Their position in life should not be relative to their male counterparts. But from all great religions, we can retrieve figures of these powerful women, the respect that is accorded to them, and then articulate and re-articulate that that respect should be there no matter what a woman does, whether she is single, whether she works in the fields, whether she is a teacher, right? Does not matter. Her value is not who she is attached to, right? But rather her as a person, good or bad. Do you think it is right for women to have dominance in different spheres? Um, I don't understand the question. So, but what I guess what you are saying is that they could have a totally separate sphere of action, and men could have a totally separate sphere of action. My assumption is, and my hope is, that it should not matter which sphere you are in. Gender should not matter. The quality of your work absolutely should matter. Your ethics, the kind of person you are, should matter. But not separate, but equal, right? No, equal in the same world in which men live, right? That's my hope. Awareness can be given to people about the gender in, but what can be done when they, particularly even women themselves, aren't ready to give up their ideologies followed for centuries? And that's a problem in every major society. The indoctrination is so deep, right? It's religious, it can be cultural. The idea is that, my point is that we are not trying to say give up tradition and become like us. No. What we are trying to do is create a space in the world where more and more women can think about their lives critically. And they do. I mean, how many of you have grandmothers and moms even who tell your dads, look, I'm pulling most weight in this house. You do nothing. All you do is go to your job and come back and ask for dinner, right? So, I mean, it's not like most women need to be taught that they are in an unequal relationship. What we need to teach as teachers is that unequal relationship is not natural. It's constructed through powerful systems, cultural, religious, right, secular, uh, and that knowing that is important, right? And then, as I said, this work is constant. You never reach the end of a struggle because as you are struggling, new things are emerging, new oppositions are emerging. So that's why, if you read your Foucault, Foucault gives the example of the role of the scholar is like that of a gadfly, right? We keep pricking power. Deleuze says that so too, because the idea is the power, any power, patriarchy or political power, its tendency is to totalize. Any given system wants to subsume smaller systems and it wants to totalize its logic. So you, me, and everyone else, our job is to keep pricking it here by asking a question here, a question there, because what that does is it keeps the system on its feet. It doesn't allow it to fully totalize. Because once a system has totalized itself, then you, me, and everyone else have no identity within it other than the identity that it assigns us. That's why religions are great totalizing systems, because most of the times they take out dissent, right? The dissenters are even hanged or tortured or derided. So our job as scholars of literature and languages and culture mostly is to act as those gadflies, right? But politely, gently, with a gentle touch, right? Uh, and then build solidarities based on that. I highly recommend reading Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. A lot of people think it's just a book about teaching, but it's one of the most revolutionary texts because he teaches us how to build solidarities, right? And how to foreground kindness, love, and generosity in our activism. I think there's a lot with third gender to share with the world. What could be done to encourage them to establish their own? Well, I mean, that's a really good question. And here right now, uh, transgender and transgender identities are really huge in United States. And I always tell my students the biggest debate, religious debate I had with a Muslim religious scholar was about 35 years ago when we were talking about the rights of the transgender people, right? And we all know um, that they have lived in our societies for centuries, right? Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, they have their communities, they have their culture. In the great times of the Mughal Empire and others, they were powerful figures, right? They used to be the scribes, they used to be munshis, they used to be, court writers. But then now, of course, their situation has been um, is terrible culturally speaking. So my debate with that Mullah Sahib was simply based in this idea that if there is a perfect God, right, then that perfect God created not two genders, but one that we know is neither this nor that. And we all know of that. What are their rights? How would they legitimize their sexual drive, their pleasure, their love? What is there something in Islam that creates space for that? And he kept telling me, no, they will be rewarded in the afterlife. And my point was that there is both the things cannot be true. There is a being who obviously is beyond male and female, and then there is a perfect God to whom we associate this idea that he or she, whatever you want to call him, has created rights for every living being, but forgot to mention this third gender. So there is either an imperfect God or an imperfect human being. Both of them cannot be correct. We're not talking about someone who was born with a limb missing or an eyesight missing. Someone who was born with excess of gender, right? Undecided. What are their rights? And so obviously the person I was talking to was really mad at me. But the point was that these are the questions we need to pose instead of saying these people should be isolated and they no, that's not a solution. A social system which is just would answer these questions. May it be secular, may it be religious, because these are living beings. What we decide in society, the laws that we make, right, impact their lives. And there is no way we can turn around and say these people don't deserve to be counted because their number is too small. So those are my thoughts. What could be done to encourage them to establish their own identity, obviously, is make sure that they are not just begging on the streets or singing for food, that they have access to the national promise, to the funding, to a school system, so that at least they can access the system of upward mobility, which tends to be usually education. And then beyond that, that they are treated as equals and have access to jobs. There are some groups in Pakistan actually who are doing this actively. I still believe that despite the advancement that we have made in women's rights here in the United States, in India, and elsewhere, I think it's still an unequal world in so many ways. Think about, I'm not going to ask you to answer this question, but where you work, look around and ask yourself, how much labor do women put in every single day in running your institution or your department? And if there are any men of equal position, and I'm not generalizing men, but if they are men of power, how much work do they put in, right? And then look at the numbers. Yeah, you could have a women's college run by women, but those are aberrations. Majority of the world outside powerful positions are held by men, right? And even so, I don't think so we're out of that even within capitalism. But if you look at traditional societies, where I come from, your rural communities, right? I don't think so we have even touched the surface there yet, right? Uh, and I think it would be dangerous to assume that we are done with gender divide or gender discrimination, because every time you assume a norm without critically challenging it, you are actually agreeing with the dominant order, right? That's why Freire famously says is that being neutral is no position at all. Because when you're neutral, it means you're on the side of the status quo. Status quo is always in the favor of the dominant groups, right? So Yeah, I don't think so. It has ended or is likely to end soon. That's why I say that these kind of struggles, the struggles for rights of women, the struggles for minorities, the struggles for, let's say, Dalit people, minorities in Pakistan, these are always constant struggles.